Hall in Toronto, or on November 28th at Centre in the Square in Kitchener. Visit our website, CIUT.fm, to show your support for the sound of your city. Thank you in advance.
From the roots up, CIUT 89.5 FM, Toronto.
The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the producers and or the persons appearing on the program, and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of CIUT FM.
From New York, this is Democracy Now!
Day one, I will launch the largest deportation program of criminals in American history. We're going to get them out. We have to. I will invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. You know, 1798. That's when they ran the country a little tougher than we run it today.
As Donald Trump threatens to invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, we'll look at how immigrant rights lawyers are preparing to challenge Trump's plans to close the border and deport millions. We'll speak to Lee Gallant of the ACLU, then to Arizona, a state won by Donald Trump, but where a Democrat, Ruben Gallego, won a heated Senate race. Arizona voters approved a constitutional amendment guaranteeing abortion access while also backing a harsh anti-immigrant ballot initiative. Then we'll look at Trump's pick to head the EPA, former New York Congressman Lee Zeldin, who has a long record of opposing environmental regulations. Finally, the head of the UN Climate Summit in the Petro state of Azerbaijan is caught on tape promoting new fossil fuel deals.
Well, definitely in a couple of years, I think the production levels will start declining. Not now, not next year. And even with net zero, we will have a certain amount of oil and natural gas being produced, perhaps forever.
Those were the words of the CEO of the COP29 Climate Summit. He thought he was speaking to a fossil fuel investor. He was actually talking to an undercover investigator from Global Witness. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, War, Peace, and the Presidency. I'm Amy Goodman. In Gaza, the Palestinian Health Ministry reports Israeli strikes have killed at least 47 people and wounded more than 180 in the past 24 hours. Among the dead is a child who was killed when a massive Israeli airstrike tore through a makeshift camp for displaced Palestinians in Al-Mawasi, an area in southern Gaza designated by the Israeli army as a so-called safe humanitarian zone. This comes as the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, has again warned famines imminent in northern Gaza. On Tuesday, top UN humanitarian official Joyce Msuya told the Security Council Israel's committed grave international crimes by blocking aid to Palestinians. She added, quote, "The daily cruelty we see in Gaza seems to have no limits."
Most of Gaza is now a wasteland of rubble. What distinction was made and what precautions were taken if more than 70% of civilian housing is either damaged or destroyed? Essential commercial goods and services, including electricity, have been all but cut off. This has led to increasing hunger, starvation, and now, as we have heard, potentially famine. We are witnessing acts reminiscent of the gravest international crimes.
The Biden administration said Tuesday it will not limit weapons transfers to Israel, even after Israeli forces failed to meet a U.S.-imposed 30-day deadline to increase the flow of food and humanitarian aid into Gaza. Aid groups say Israel has only worsened the catastrophe over that period, with the amount of aid reaching Gaza now at its lowest level since December. The decision to continue arming Israel despite widespread evidence of gross gross human rights abuses appears to violate multiple U.S. laws, including the Leahy Law, the Foreign Assistance Act, and the Arms Export Control Act. On Tuesday, a coalition of former Biden administration employees who've resigned in protest of U.S. policy released a video calling on Biden to uphold the law and halt U.S. weapons transfers to Israel.
There is no provision in U.S. or international law that allows extra time to starve people.
Joe Biden's administration has repeatedly put Israel's interests over the interests of the American people.
Even at the expense of not enforcing our own laws.
That's why I resigned from the State Department.
The State Department.
State Department. The State Department's Diplomatic Corps.
The Department of Education.
The Department of the Interior.
Army.
Department of the Interior.
Department of the Air Force.
To see our interviews with many of the Biden administration officials who've resigned over Gaza, go to democracynow.org. Israel's continued its relentless air and ground attacks on Lebanon, killing at least 24 people in Beirut's southern suburbs and towns in Mount Lebanon Governorate. Israeli forces have persistently targeted residential buildings and other civilian infrastructure. Meanwhile, Israeli authorities issued new forced evacuation orders for residents in certain areas south of Beirut ahead of more Israeli military attacks. The National Press Club in Washington, D.C. has handed its top award for press freedom to Wael al-Dadu, Al Jazeera's Gaza bureau chief, for continuing to report on Israel's assault on the besieged territory despite enduring, quote, unspeakable personal tragedies, unquote. Just weeks into the war, al-Dadu was live on air when he was informed his wife, his 7-year-old daughter, and 15-year-old son were killed in an Israeli airstrike on the Nuseirat refugee camp. Another of al-Dadu's children, Hamza al-Dadu, who was also a journalist and camera person for Al Jazeera, was then killed in a separate Israeli attack early in January. Earlier this year, al-Dadu was evacuated from Gaza to receive medical care in Qatar for injuries he suffered while covering an Israeli attack on a school sheltering displaced Palestinians in Khan Yunis. At the time, Wael al-Dadu's camera person, Samer Abu Daka, was left to bleed to death as Israeli forces blocked ambulances from reaching the scene for several hours. Wael al-Dadu is now living in Germany. Donald Trump selected former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee to become U.S. ambassador to Israel. Huckabee is a leading U.S. Christian Zionist who, in recent years, has led all-inclusive evangelical Christian tours of Israel. Huckabee has openly advocated for Israel's annexation of the occupied West Bank and Gaza. During a failed run for the Republican presidential nomination in 2008, he declared, quote, "There's no really such thing as a Palestinian," adding that's been a political tool to try and force land away from Israel, unquote. In 2017, he told Politico, quote, "There's no such thing as a settlement. Their communities, their neighborhoods, their cities. There's no such thing as an occupation," he said.
Wow.
Meanwhile, Trump has named his longtime friend and golfing partner, Steve Witkoff, as a special envoy to the Middle East. Witkoff is a real estate investor from Florida with no foreign policy experience.
Just as bad as Kamala, man.
Donald Trump will nominate Fox News personality Pete Hegseth to become
Kamala said
Secretary
she'd
of
support
Defense. He
the Zionists
co-anchors
unconditionally.
the weekend
Seems
morning
Trump's the
talk
same
show
thing,
Fox
man.
and Friends, where Trump has been a frequent guest. He previously led Concerned Veterans for America, a group backed by the far-right billionaire Koch brothers. Hegseth served as infantry captain in the Army National Guard, completing tours of duty in
Sad.
Afghanistan and Iraq. He was a guard at the U.S. Naval Base in Guantanamo Bay,
Very,
Cuba, in
very
2004 and 5, and has argued the prison should not be closed. In 2019, Hegseth successfully lobbied Trump to pardon 3 U.S. service members accused of war crimes, including an officer found guilty of ordering soldiers to open fire on unarmed Afghan civilians. Hegseth is author of the book The War on Warriors, which argues the U.S. military has been made weak by diversity and inclusion initiatives. He's promised to fire so-called woke generals and has argued women should not have combat roles, calling men more capable. Donald Donald Trump has nominated John Ratcliffe to lead the Central Intelligence
That may be true
Agency.
for foot
Ratcliffe is a former
soldiers,
Texas
for all you
Republican
know.
congressman, former federal prosecutor who
Not
served as director of
necessarily
national
fighter
intelligence
pilots.
from 2020 until Trump left
Or
office
astronauts.
in 2021. Ratcliffe was a member of Trump's impeachment advisory team in 2019 when he questioned witnesses during Trump's first impeachment trial hearings. Donald Trump has named Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to lead a new Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. In announcing the appointments, Trump said the billionaires would be tasked with dismantling government bureaucracy, cutting waste, and restructuring entire federal agencies, with their work set to conclude by July 4th, 2026. Musk is the world's richest person, as majority owner of SpaceX, which receives billions of dollars in contracts from NASA, the Pentagon, and U.S. spy agencies. The Associated Press reports Elon Musk spent $200 million through his Political Action Committee on efforts to help Trump win the election. Senate Republican leaders are gathering behind closed doors today to pick a new majority leader to replace Mitch McConnell. 3 leading candidates have emerged: South Dakota Senator John Thune, Texas's John Cornyn, and Florida's Rick Scott. Meanwhile, the chair of the House Freedom Caucus, Republican Andy Harris, said a far-right Congress member might challenge Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson for the gavel during leadership elections. In more news from Capitol Hill, the House has voted down a bill that would have allowed incoming President Trump to target nonprofit organizations as political enemies. The bill failed to win the 2/3 majority needed for approval. This is Texas Democratic Congressmember Lloyd Doggett of Austin speaking ahead of Tuesday's vote.
Mr. Speaker, this bill authorizes Donald Trump to recklessly impose a death penalty on any nonprofit in America that happens to be on his enemies list. With this bill, he can destroy the very life of civil society in this country, one group after another, even though the group involved that he targets as a terrorist supporting group has not violated a single law.
A federal jury in Virginia has found the U.S. military contractor CIUT Premier Technology liable for the torture of 3 prisoners at Abu Ghraib prison during the U.S.-led occupation of Iraq in the early 2000s. The landmark verdict came after 16 years of litigation. It's the first time a civilian contractor has been found legally responsible for the gruesome abuses at Abu Ghraib, which included murder, sexual assault, and rape, the use of attack dogs, sleep deprivation, prolonged isolation, dietary manipulation, induced hypothermia, mock executions, and the humiliation of prisoners. On Tuesday, the plaintiff's lawyer, Bahar Azmi of Center for Constitutional Rights, said the jury had rendered an important verdict.
Each plaintiff $3 million in compensatory damages and $11 million each in punitive damages, sending a strong message that this kind of corporate malfeasance and neglect and recklessness and deflection is outrageous and deserves to be punished.
And in Scotland, climate activists are appearing in court this week in a bid to stop the development of the Rosebank oil field in the North Sea by the Norwegian company Equinor. Earlier this year, the UK's Labour government acknowledged the previous Conservative government's approval of the Rosebank project without considering whether its full climate impact was unlawful. If the plaintiffs are successful, the landmark case could help establish a precedent for all new oil and gas development. This is climate campaigner Lauren MacDonald speaking outside the Court of Session at Edinburgh, Scotland.
This case, if we win, it could set a precedent that could stop all new oil and gas drilling in the UK and further afield, which is absolutely needed, because when we look at the intense rainfall and flooding that we've seen here in the UK and across Europe this year, we know that this is only going to become worse and be made more frequent as long as we continue burning fossil fuels.
Democracy Now! will be broadcasting all next week from the UN Climate Summit in Azerbaijan. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. War, Peace, and the Presidency. I'm Amy Goodman. As Donald Trump threatens to invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, we look at how immigrant rights lawyers are preparing to challenge Trump's claim that he will close the border and engage in the largest deportation campaign in U.S. history. Back in a minute. Rising by Muse. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. War, Peace, and the Presidency. I'm Amy Goodman. Immigrant rights lawyers are preparing to battle with Donald Trump as he vows to carry out the largest mass deportation in U.S. history once he takes office in January. This week, Trump named several key figures who will oversee his plan. Stephen Miller has been tapped to serve as White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. During the first Trump administration, Miller helped orchestrate the Muslim ban, push for the separation of immigrant families, and back the termination of DACA. That's the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that's granted protection to certain undocumented people brought to the U.S. as children. Trump has also picked Thomas Homan to serve as his so-called border czar. Homan served as acting director of ICE, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, during Trump's first term, and has also been described as one of the intellectual authors of Trump's zero-tolerance policy that separated thousands of migrant children from their parents at the U.S.-Mexico border. Trump's also nominated South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem to serve as the next Secretary of Homeland Security. NBC News is reporting the incoming Trump administration's already talking to private prison companies about drastically expanding immigrant detention centers, including building some near major U.S. cities. Days before last week's election, Trump spoke about invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798.
And on day one, I will launch the largest deportation program of criminals in American history. We're going to get them out. We have to. I will invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. You know, 1798. That's when they ran the country a little tougher than we run it today.
So that was Donald Trump speaking a day before the election. This is Stephen Miller speaking in February at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, where he outlined how mass deportations could be carried out.
Seal the border. No illegals in. Everyone here goes out. That's very straightforward. In terms of the policy sets to accomplish this, as President Trump showed in his first term, it's a series of interlocking domestic and foreign policies to accomplish this goal. In no particular order, just to rattle off a few fast. You have your Safe Third agreements. You have Remain in Mexico. Finish the wall. You have robust prosecutions of illegal aliens. You do interior repatriation flights to Mexico, not back to the north of Mexico. It's very important. You re-implement Title 42. You have several muscular 212Fs. That's the travel ban authority. We did a few of those in the Trump administration. You would bring those back and add new ones on top of that. You would establish large-scale staging grounds for removal flights. So you grab illegal immigrants and then you move them to the staging grounds, and that's where the planes are waiting for federal law enforcement to then move those illegals home. You deputize the National Guard to carry out immigration enforcement.
So that's Stephen Miller. We're joined right now by Lee Galern, Deputy Director of the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project, argued some of the most high-profile immigration cases during the first Trump administration, including the one to stop Trump's family separation policy. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Lee. It's great to have you with us. Okay, so you hear Stephen Miller laying it out, and it's the first appointments that Trump has made. How are you beginning to deal with this? What do you see is being laid out here?
Yeah, so we have been preparing for nearly a year for this. I think the first time around we were caught off guard. We moved very quickly, but this time I think we were prepared for it more. And so since the winter, we have had multiple attorneys at the National Office of the ACLU preparing for all these policies that are being threatened. And the military is being threatened to be used. We're preparing for that. The mass deportations, potential for more family separation, border policies that would restrict asylum seekers. So we're preparing for all, but we're clear-eyed that it's not going to be easy. And the one thing I would stress is that it can't be done solely through the courts. We will be in the courts, but it needs to be a national effort, similar to what happened with family separation, where the public said, but enough is enough. That's a red line, taking little babies away. Went out to the streets peacefully to protest, let it be known. Yes, we want immigration reform, but not something like this. We don't want the military walking through the streets. People need to make that clear. We need some kind of balanced approach. We are not opposed to basic immigration reform, but this cannot be a situation where we're just going after immigrants left and right.
So talk about what Miller is threatening, and of course, most importantly, what Trump is threatening.
Right.
They are building detention centers. They're saying they're going to prepare them between New York and Philadelphia, outside Denver and Chicago. How does this work?
Well, we'll see how they try and do it. I mean, we don't know it. I mean, I'm not sure the logistics are there, but we're concerned about it, and we're not going to underestimate how egregious the policies may be. Well, the first thing we're preparing for is what President Trump has said about the Alien Enemies Act, the law from 1798. He's saying he can use the military to start deporting people. We think that's absolutely wrong. It would be illegal. The law is very clear that you need an invasion from a foreign government. This is not an invasion from foreign government. Immigrants coming to seek safety or a better life. So if he tries to use the military under the Alien Enemies Act, we would be prepared for it. We're prepared for if he tries to use the National Guard. But if it's just going to be straight enforcement, egregious enforcement, I mean, we're going to have to do what we can do, try to get individual lawyers for people. But I think people also need to recognize that from a policy standpoint, we need immigrants here for a variety of reasons, including for the economy. And so I hope that businesses will push back and say, we need these workers. And the other thing that's going to happen is if he starts deporting everyone like he's claiming, we're going to be seeing more family separation. There's U.S. citizen children who have undocumented parents. They're going to be left alone, or they're going to have to move to a country that they've never stepped foot in. But to your question of how it's going to work logistically, we don't know, but we're not underestimating how much resources they're going to put into it.
So let's go to Homan. During a recent interview on 60 Minutes, Trump's pick to be the so-called border czar, Tom Homan, said the mass deportation campaign could also target U.S.-born children, born to undocumented parents. He was interviewed by Cecilia Vega.
We have seen one estimate that says it would cost $88 billion to deport 1 million people a year.
I don't know if that's accurate or not.
Is that what American taxpayers should expect?
What price do you put on national security? Is it worth it?
Is there a way to carry out mass deportation without separating families?
Of course there is. Families can be deported together.
Of course there is. Take those U.S. babies and deport them with their parents. Lee, you have directly dealt with all sorts of cases like this. What is he talking about?
Yeah, so I suspect he's not claiming that they can actually deport the U.S. citizen. That would be flatly illegal, and obviously we would challenge it. Right, but I think what he's saying, I mean, I don't know. You're right. It's ambiguous. But what he may be saying is we're going to deport the parents, and then, of course, the children are going to have to go with them. That's not necessarily true. That means I think there's going to be family separation because children are going to stay behind with a relative, and so they're never going to see their parents again, potentially, or they're going to have to move their children to a country that they have no connection to. If he is actually, as maybe that clip is suggesting, thinking he can deport U.S. citizen children, I've never heard that. That is flatly illegal, and we would challenge it. But even if that's not what he's talking about, even if he's just forcing this choice on parents, either bring my child with me to this country or leave them behind, that's as egregious as it gets. And every president has had the authority to deport parents with U.S. citizen children, but they've all used the discretion not to, so we don't separate families unless we're talking about hardened criminals or national security threats. So we're really talking about a sea change in American immigration law that I think is ultimately going to be saying history looks back on and says, what have we done?
Homan started working under Obama. He then became the interim ICE director under Trump. 5,000 kids, a number you know well, 5,500 kids separated from their parents. Still 1,000 kids are separated from their parents?
So the amazing thing is that we don't have all the records. We're still looking for families, but we estimate that there may be 1,000 children, little children, still separated from their parents, that it's been now 6-7 years they haven't seen their parents. Many of them were separated when they were just babies or toddlers, will not even really remember their parents. And the other thing I want to stress is that people think, well, if they're reunited, the 4,000 ACOs been able to reunite, they're fine now. They are suffering so much trauma. I mean, I'm talking to families, a 3-year-old boy who got reunited. He's standing by the window looking to see if men are going to come and take him away again. A little boy saying, Mommy, I don't want to go to bed because that's when they took me away. So the trauma is unbelievable, even for the families who are separated. This is, I think, the worst thing I have seen in 30 years, the family separation. President Trump is not ruling it out again, and Thomas Homan is trying to whitewash how bad it was, saying that it wasn't really that bad. It was as bad as anything you could imagine, and now they're talking about doubling down on separating families.
So Trump was forced to reverse his executive order separating children. As you said, that didn't just come from lawyers like you going to court. It came from millions of people in the streets. It was universal condemnation. You have the Bush-appointed judge calling the separations one of the most shameful chapters in the history of our country. Now,
Exactly,
under
it is.
Obama, he engaged in the largest number of deportations in U.S. history. Then we move into Trump. At this point, since Trump has made very clear what he's about to do, what can President Biden do preemptively? I mean, a number of people have argued in law journals about pardoning undocumented immigrants preemptively.
Yeah, I think there's some things he can do. I'm not sure that he has the power to really stop all this in these next 2 months, and I don't know whether the administration will do it. We're certainly talking to them about things they can do to make sure that, for example, our settlement, giving rights to these families who were separated, is secure, and that some other things. I don't know that he's going to be able to pardon all these people. I think we need to do what we can in these next 2 months, but really start gearing up for a Trump administration where I think it's going to be, worse than anything we've seen. We're talking about really horrible anti-immigrant sentiment, and I think that's one of the things we really need to reverse here is how bad the anti-immigrant sentiment has gotten. In my 30 years, I have never seen it this bad. The one thing that I'm hopeful for is that the American public says, well, look, we wanted immigration reform, but you're now starting to cross the line past what we wanted. The same thing that happened in the first administration where people said, wait, we wanted immigration reform, but we don't want you taking little babies away. I think if the public sees the military in the streets or these huge deportation camps or family separation again, I'm hopeful that they will come out and say, wait, that's not what we wanted.
I wanted to end with that famous audio track of the children in 2018 that ProPublica obtained, kids who were being held at Customs and Border Protection facility after being separated from their families. The kids believed to be between the ages of 4 and 10. They can be heard screaming, Mommy and Papi. This is an excerpt. It's incredibly disturbing. We're not hearing it right now. We're going to try to bring it up. Well, I think most people maybe who are tuned into this, unfortunately we can't play it at the moment, hearing the crying and the mocking by the guards of this, of the agony. And the reason I also brought it up is ProPublica brought it out, a nonprofit news organization. And I wanted to get your final comment on a different story, but it is the news from Capitol Hill that the House yesterday voted down a bill that would have allowed incoming President Trump to target nonprofit organizations as political enemies. The bill did get a majority of the vote, but it failed to win the 2/3 majority needed for approval. Can you talk about the significance of this? The ACLU was involved in really explaining its dangers.
Yeah, I mean, we were involved with a coalition of groups that's vehemently opposed to giving that kind of unilateral power to the executive branch to start going after nonprofits. I think it's a very dangerous situation when you're starting to give the Treasury Department the ability unilaterally, without any real due process, to start going after nonprofits they disagree with. The bill could come back, so we're not going to rest, but you're right, it did get a majority, and so that's very scary.
Legal Alert, I want to thank you for being with us, Deputy Director of the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project, arguing some of the most high-profile immigration cases during the first Trump administration, including one to stop Trump's family separation policy. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn to Arizona, where voters on Election Day approved a sweeping ballot measure that would allow state and local law enforcement to arrest immigrants suspected of crossing the U.S.-Mexico border outside ports of entry, while empowering state judges to order deportations. The new law, which creates a series of state crimes targeting immigrants, is modeled after a similar measure in Texas known as SB 4 that's currently under review by the U.S. Supreme Court. Only certain portions of Prop 314 are scheduled to go into effect later this month, while the most harmful parts of the new law won't be enforced until the Supreme Court rules on the constitutionality of Texas's SB 4. The measures draw in comparisons to Arizona's controversial SB 1070, the 2010 law that also gave local police authority to arrest immigrants suspected of being undocumented. SB 1070 was largely struck down by the Supreme Court. Well, over 60% of Arizona's voters backed the anti-immigrant measure. A separate historic initiative also passed by a landslide, enshrining the right to an abortion in Arizona's constitution. Donald Trump won the presidential race in Arizona, getting 52% of the vote, but Arizonans also elected Democrat Ruben Gallego, who beat the Republican Trump ally Carrie Lake in a closely watched Senate race. For more on all this, we go to Tucson, Arizona, where we're joined by Alejandro Pablos, longtime reproductive and immigrant justice community organizer targeted by Immigration and Customs Enforcement for her pro-choice activism and faced deportation proceedings for over a decade. We welcome you back, Alejandra, to Democracy Now! So if you can explain what's going on in Arizona right now, votes for the anti-immigrant bill and for the pro-abortion bill, votes for the Democrat Gallego and for Trump.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Democracy Now!, for having me back. It's a pleasure. Thank you to all our friends and organizers who are resisting every day. It's a lot that you're bringing up. It's chaotic, I know. Just to be in my body every day, it's super, super traumatic. As someone who's been fighting detention, deportation, have been sharing my story of having abortions, of being incarcerated, I definitely feel the chills. I've been under technological surveillance, retaliation. I've been doxxed. I cannot say that I don't feel the chills. But I also know that we've been here before. I also know that for a long time we've been moving to the right. People say to the center on immigration. But really, voters voted for this because they called it a border security issue. And that's not really what it was. It is a racial profiling, right? It is a way to distort criminal charges already and use them for immigration. It is a way to use our state resources to already scare and make our people more desperate. What we want is a stable economy that has dignity and prosperity for all of us, working people, migrant people, racialized people. And I think there's just a lot of confusion, a lot of rhetoric, because again, we are, all of us are not having our basic needs met. I think in a moment where Gallegos wins, beats Carrie Lake, but Trump wins, it is chaotic. There's a lot of nuance to that, right? People are not going to vote for a woman either, so the misogyny is just like right in front of our face. I'm so glad that, the Prop 1319, the ballot measure for abortion access, passed, but still it is not enough. It is another state-based Roe v. Wade, which we know is going to be attacked still. And it's really unfortunate to be right now in this moment having to organize with familias, having to organize rapid response networks, the defenses of committee, working with people on the ground, trying to inform folks on their rights and what they could do to protect each other. Because for a long time, we've been doing that. You know, a lot of us cannot trust the police. We see the harms of police and ICE collaboration. And I think the administration right now can do so much more to protect me and other people, activists who've been speaking out. You know, last time when Trump came in to his presidency, he immediately deported and targeted Maru for her activism, right? Que Viva la Resistencia, shut down Northwest Detention Center. And we don't know who they're going to be targeting immediately, right? Myself, with my deportation case, I'm still in limbo. And I know the administration right now can do more. They can close cases. They can, you know, stop using technological tech to give it to ICE to start targeting and deporting us. So there's just so much right now that we need to talk about. And unfortunately, the Democratic Party didn't do enough to be the opposite of Trump, right? Show us an opposite to the vision that Trump is giving us. So,
and yet Gallego won.
Pray for us.
And yet Alejandra Ruben Gallego won. He'll be the first Latino senator representing Arizona.
Yeah, I want to be very careful that, you know, not just being Latino represents us. I love that Ruben Gallego is now my new target. And our new target, we expect Ruben Gallego to do a lot to protect people in Arizona and to fight for people. And we will be holding him accountable, absolutely.
So then explain Prop 314 that did get voted for, how it's divided in two parts. Part of it goes into effect soon, and the other part, the Supreme Court has to weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, this is a copycat of what's happening in Texas as before, right? Those really punitive measures, I think, are still being reviewed at the Supreme Court, but we also know who and what the Supreme Court is made of, and it's not a friend of ours. We've been seeing the Supreme Court also moving more to the right, taking away our rights. So we see that it is going to pass, and like you're saying, there will be already as soon as the end of November, many of these parts of the Prop 314 actually go into effect, which is attacking benefits, right? Really, again, the fear has already been inflicted now, whether this passes, some of it doesn't, the fear is already there. And also the conflict between even families, right? That sometimes we see people voting for Trump, that means you're voting against us, right? So I myself trying to give everyone a little bit more grace because of how desperate and how our communities right now all want safety and an economy that is really for the people and not for the rich and for Trump's friends.
Finally, Alejandra, explain your own situation as a pro-abortion activist. You felt targeted and were detained.
Yeah, I think, again, people who are speaking out are the first to feel the chills. I've been doxxed by, local vigilantes and local, just activists who want to see me deported, who want to see me be separated from my family. So me speaking out, and I think right now, even though it is a risk, but what we will not do is go back into the shadows. What we will not do is stop loving on one another. And we're going to continue to organize. I think right now, again, the important demands are that the administration right now can start closing cases. I myself and many other people are just waiting on paperwork, have tried to reopen their cases to terminate, so we do not go into deportation proceedings under yet another administration that's super violent against immigration. And so I think, again, doing more right now is what's important. They're most vulnerable folks, like trans folks, that need to be having their cases terminated, so we do not feel those attacks yet again.
And you're talking about the federal government
right now.
You're talking about federal government, President Biden weighing in at this point before President Trump takes office. If you can talk about the demands of the community and the organizing, because we're not talking about future militarization of the border, though it certainly will be more. It's currently where you are in Tucson, Arizona, seriously militarized.
Absolutely. I'm also a coordinator with the Dignity Not Detention Coalition in California. And we just actually took we went to all the different detention centers in California. There is still 7, although there was 16, and people organizing there have shut them down. But we also traveled to Whiskey 8, which is an open-air detention center, and our colleagues there have been supporting people and making sure that those people have what they need. And it is getting really, really hostile at the border, right? They're going to continue building that wall. They're going to continue to have people just outside, pushing people outside of the ports of entry to ask for asylum, right? That's what's already happening, and that's what they're threatening to do more of. So we're really seeing that, again, the most impacted people are coming from where we're denying migration is as African countries, South and Central America, and Southeast Asian. And we really need to, again, show up for those folks and really be ready to welcome folks. It's really unfortunate that also in Tucson, we're talking about not supporting people that are coming, not supporting refugees. This sentiment of like, close the door behind me, that's our job right now, to fight and to talk about all of us need our basic necessities met. And also it's really irresponsible that we don't talk about what the U.S. government and policies have been doing to cause people to migrate. A lot of people have been coming because, again, we have intervened and we have really criminalized and created police and more prisons in other countries. And we have to really understand, like, we can't be forcing people out when literally this could be a safe haven for a lot of people. And we're reuniting with our family members. And like it was said previously, we're going to be separated from our families. There are going to be children that are U.S. citizens that are going to be also impacted. I think the workers are going to be impacted the most as well. In Tucson, Arizona, we're working with the Southside workers. Derechos Humanos is organizing familias, right, to just even share information. We want to be able to also spend the holidays with our families, but instead we have to organize forums. We have to start writing, protecting our property and writing papers for notary to protect. Like it's a lot of things we have to do, and we don't want to do that. That's really unfortunate.
Trans
that
means
Trump
migration, homelessness,
and continue to put us on high crisis
immigration,
alert.
trans.
So traumatic. My three-year-old nephew said, "What?
Transfer to another country.
Trump is going to be mean to people." 3-year-old kids are knowing what the trauma is like, and like that's what we're going to grow. Little bodies being traumatized by racism.
Alondra Pavlos, I want to thank you for being with us, reproductive justice community organizer and storyteller based in Tucson, Arizona. Targeted by ICE herself for her activism and faced deportation proceedings for over a decade. Coming up, we look at Trump's pick to head the EPA. Former New York Congressmember Lee Zeldin long opposed environmental regulations. We're also talking about moving the EPA out of Washington. People say it's not a relocation, it's a decapitation. Stay with us.
Well, I went to the bank this morning, and the cashier said to me, if you join the Christmas club, we'll give you 10 of them flags for free. Well, I didn't mess around a bit. I took him up on what he said, and I stuck them stickers all over my car and one on my wife's forehead. But your flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore. They're already overcrowded from your dirty little war. Now Jesus don't like killing, no matter what the reasons for.
Jesus don't like killing no matter what the reasons for. But there's lots of people who are supporting Israel like they're picking their
Anymore by John Prine. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, War, Peace, and the Presidency. I'm Amy Goodman.
USA and
As Donald
Israel,
Trump
what they're
quickly
doing,
moves to name his
they won't.
cabinet, we turn now to look at his pick to head the Environmental Protection Agency, former New York Congressmember Lee Zeldin. The Long Island Republican served 4 terms in the House, where he earned a score of just 14 out of 100 from the League of Conservation Voters after consistently voting against critical environmental protections and clean energy job investments. Zeldin's nomination came after the New York Times reported Trump's transition team is discussing moving the EPA headquarters outside D.C. Nate James of the American Federation of Government Employees told Politico many career EPA officials would leave the agency if it moves, adding it could be advertised as a relocation, but really it would be decapitation. We go now to Judith
EPA
Enck, who
is a
served
good
as
thing,
EPA
man.
Regional Administrator under President Obama, now President of Beyond Plastics. We're speaking to her outside Albany. Hi, Judith. Thanks so much for joining us again. Can you talk about, as both a former EPA administrator and a person from New York, where Lee Zeldin was a Congress member for years, talk about what a Zeldin heading the EPA looks like?
Well, Lee Zeldin at the helm at EPA will be a wonderful tenure for fossil fuel companies, plastics companies, chemical companies, but it's going to be really bad for people who want to breathe clean air, drink water that doesn't have toxic chemicals or lead in it. And I'm particularly concerned about what a Zeldin EPA would mean for environmental justice communities, places like Cancer Alley in Louisiana, places like Appalachia and Texas, where there's a concentration of petrochemical facilities. And today, there is not enough environmental protections in place. I'm glad you mentioned Lee Zeldin's tenure in Congress, where he had the not very impressive score of 14% voting record when he was in Congress. But let's go back even further. Some people don't know that Lee Zeldin was a state senator in Albany, and his record was so bad that a statewide environmental group gave him the distinguished 2011 Oil Slick Award. And he earned that Oil Slick Award because he introduced bills that would have, for instance, reduce funding for mass transit, provide dirty water in his Long Island district, and he just really stood out when he was in Albany, and then he took that environmental perspective to Washington, where his record was equally bad. I do want to talk a little bit about his run for governor against Democrat Kathy Hochul, because some people are saying it kind of doesn't matter what Zeldin's policy positions are because he's just going to do what Donald Trump tells him to do. But make no mistake, Lee Zeldin is in lockstep agreement with the Trump administration anti-environmental agenda. When he was in Congress, he did a few good things that'll be interesting to watch. Very few. He opposed offshore drilling in the Atlantic Ocean. I don't know what that means, though, for offshore wind development. He was a member of the Republican Climate Solutions Caucus, and they never did anything. And in breaking news, he supported protections for shellfish in Long Island Sound. Those are the only three positives that I could dig up on his environmental record. So I have to agree with the guest from the ACLU who said this is going to be worse than anything we have ever seen at the EPA.
And talk about Project 2025 that Trump disavowed, but that as soon as he was elected, people were saying, of course, this is what the plan is. Talk about the plan, including over 150 pages with, and to say the least, damaging environmental plans.
Yeah, this is very concerning. Project 2025 is 900 pages, and 150 are dedicated to anti-environmental policies. Project 2025 calls for disbanding the EPA Office of Environmental Justice, disbanding the office at EPA that deals with enforcement of critical environmental laws. They want to speed approval of chemicals. They want to weaken the Clean Air Act by removing the essential part of the statute, which requires the EPA to set health-based standards when regulating air pollution. The plan uses phrases like the perceived threat of climate change. They want to shut down climate research, not only at the EPA, but at a dozen federal agencies. They want to see more fossil fuel development on public lands, not just private lands. So they're advocating for drilling in Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and also drilling for fossil fuels in Minnesota's Boundary Waters wilderness areas.
No.
And finally, all of us, unfortunately, have learned about the tremendous health damage caused by forever chemicals known as PFAS chemicals, where EPA plays a major role. Something EPA finally recently did was classify PFAS chemicals as a hazardous substance. That was kind of a no-brainer. And this plan wants to reverse that.
Finally, I want to ask you about moving the EPA out of Washington. Is this just a geographic thing, or what would it mean with so many people obviously not moving?
Well, I think it's not efficiency. I think it's an effort to drive out the long-term career employees that work at the EPA office. I want to point out there are 10 regional offices all over the country, but the role of the Washington office is to essentially establish the rules of the road when it comes to pollution. How much air toxics are we allowed to breathe in Cancer Alley? What toxic chemicals will be in our drinking water? So I really don't think this is about government efficiency. I think this is about terrorizing the career staff at EPA, making their life harder, distracting them, and most importantly, taking them away from their day jobs, which is strictly enforcing environmental laws.
Judith, I want to thank you for being with us, former EPA Regional Administrator under President Obama, now serving as President of Beyond Plastics. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. We end today's show talking about the UN Climate Summit in Baku, Azerbaijan. It's entered its third day. On Tuesday, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres issued a dire warning.
The sound you hear is the ticking clock. We are in the final countdown to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And time is not on our side.
Many climate activists have criticized the decision to hold the talks in Azerbaijan, an authoritarian petro-state. Azerbaijan is also facing accusations it's using the climate talks to make future fossil fuel deals. Well, the group Global Witness has released a secret recording of Elnur Sultanov, the chief executive of the climate talks known as COP29. An undercover investigator with Global Witness posed as a fossil fuel investor and held an online meeting with Sultanov, during which he discussed possible fossil fuel deals.
As I said, we have a lot of pipeline infrastructure. We have a lot of gas fields that are to be developed. We have a lot of green projects that SOCAR is very interested in. There are a lot of joint ventures that could be established, potential joint ventures. Our SOCAR trading is trading oil and gas all over the world, including in Asia. So to me, these are the possibilities to explore.
Those were the words of Elnur Sultanov, the chief executive of the UN climate talks in Azerbaijan. We go now to Leila Stanley, interim head of fossil fuel investigations at Global Witness, joining us from Philadelphia. Leila, thanks for being with us. So talk about the significance of what he admitted to your group, albeit he thought he was talking to a fossil fuel investor and thought he could make a deal during the UN climate summit that he's heading.
That's right. Thanks so much for having me, Amy. So let me just set the scene for your listeners. As many folks probably remember, last year, the climate conference was hosted by another petro-state, the United Arab Emirates. And we found that over the year that the UAE held the COP28 host position, its state-owned oil company sought out close to $100 billion in new oil and gas and petrochemical deals. And given that Azerbaijan, also a petro-state, most of its revenue coming from oil and gas, is hosting this year's climate conference, we thought we wanted to see if something similar might be happening this year. So as you say, we went undercover, we posed as a fake oil and gas investor, and we reached out to the COP29 team behind the climate conference. And what we found was that in exchange for just the promise of sponsorship money, that got us to the heart of the COP29 team. We spoke with people who introduced us to a senior executive at the state-owned oil company of Azerbaijan, that's SOCAR. And we were introduced, as you say, to Elnur Sultanov, the CEO of COP29, also the Deputy Energy Minister of Azerbaijan, and on the board of SOCAR. And in speaking with our investigators, Sultanov said that COP is not about oil and gas, but then he pitched Azerbaijan as a growing gas producer, and he described an energy future in which fossil fuels would feature, in his words, perhaps forever.
Let's go to that clip, that same call, Sultanov saying that oil and gas would be produced perhaps forever.
So definitely in a couple of years, I think the production levels will start declining, not now, not next year. And even with net zero, we will have a certain amount of oil and natural gas being produced, perhaps forever.
So if you can talk, Leila, about what this means for the UN Climate Summit. You have countries pulling out, saying these are not worth it. And yet you have thousands of activists who come from the most hardest hit parts of the planet saying this is our last hope.
Yeah, a couple of things. So first, I want people to remember that the UN Climate Conference, the COP process, it is the only game in town when it comes to rallying global efforts to avert climate breakdown. And that's the point of these conferences. And so that's why it's so shocking to me that the COP executive, Sultanov, would allow the conference itself to be essentially hijacked by oil and gas interests looking to use it as another business opportunity. At the same time, we can't lose sight of how essential this process is. I think the recent election results in the U.S. underscore how essential it's going to be more than ever to have a functioning international process to stop climate breakdown. And we can't afford to give up on COP. What we can do is force fossil lobbyists out of COP. We need the UN to ban petro interests from sitting at the table, from influencing the COP. Last year, our analysis showed that there were over 2,400 fossil fuel lobbyists at the climate conference, and that was more than almost any individual country's delegation, save one, I believe.
Wow.
So, if you just referenced what's going on in this country, in the United States, talk about Trump once again saying he's going to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord and what that means.
Yeah. You know, you can't talk about the state of climate now and the state of climate diplomacy now without acknowledging America's role as historically the biggest emitter, as Joe Biden's role in overseeing a huge expansion of crude oil exports, and now Donald Trump's commitment to removing us from the Paris Agreement and from international climate diplomacy. It's a huge blow to the climate movement. It is also one country. And I think that really underscores how essential having this functioning UN climate process is, and how important it is for the host country of COP29, for Azerbaijan, to do its job and ensure that the talks this year are moving us forward toward that goal of averting climate breakdown.
Finally, what has been the response of the head of the COP, Sultanov, to your expose?
So we made multiple efforts to reach Sultanov again, to try to reach the COP29 team, SOCAR, and they didn't respond to any of our outreach or requests for comment after the fact.
Leila Stanley, we want to thank you for being with us, interim head of fossil fuel investigations at Global Witness. Democracy Now! Will be reporting live from COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, all next week from November 18th to November 22nd. Tune in to democracynow.org. Happy birthday to Ishmael Daro. Democracy Now! Is produced with Mike Burke. Renee Feltz, Dina Guster, Messiah Rhodes, Nermeen Sheikh, Maria Terracena, Tammy Warnock, Trina Nadura, Sam Alcoff, Tamari Astudio, John Hamilton, Ravi Karen, Hani Masood, and Hannah Elias. Our executive directors, Julie Crosby. Special thanks to Becca Staley, John Randolph, Paul Powell, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, Hugh Grand, Dennis Moynihan, David Prue, Dennis McCormick, Matt Ely, Anna Ozbeck, Emily Anderson. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh yeah! The Retro Community Active Radio t-shirt is finally back, just in time for the Sound of Your City Fall fundraiser. Featuring the classic glow-in-the-dark CIUT logo from 1989. Check it out online at ciut.fm.
Okay, I don't think I wrote that many things to comment on today. Climate activists and the COP conferences, COP conferences as they're called. People could make up anything they want from a word, phonetic sound pattern, like COP is a short form for copper. COP is in its 29th year. 29 years ago, I went to a copper tone festival in Windsor that had a lot of people from all across North America. And it was called the Black Homecoming. People that look like me, my complexion, even some people that are ivory or snow complexioned, if they have certain features, they're definitely labeled black if they're American descent by the US government. Now, the awkward thing about that labels, that with this bad English world we're in, is that that word black into English came from a language where that sound means bleak. So psychologically, any person that is of the original language where that sound came from, naturally, psychologically, inherent from genetic memories, as some people talk about. I don't know if that's real. I haven't done any genetic scientific evaluation on what they call genetic memory. I know more about muscle memory, which means your muscle can remember something you've done before, if you remember it. But genetic memory, language, first language acquisition. You learn your first language from your mother primarily, and your father, if they're both in your life. Your mother primarily, if you're raised by a single mother family. For instance, your father died in combat, killed in action, missing in action. There was a lot of that going on before the mid-70s for people that were born in the Americas, because a lot of people, our ancestors, served either in many of the various combat battlefields, battle zones that existed throughout the Americas and the world. The First World War, my great-grandfather served in. Second World War, my grandfather served in. What they call the Second World War, my grandfather served in. Probably even my father served in it. Second World War II. Depends what date it really ended. Did it end 80 some odd years ago? Or did it just end over 50 years ago? World War II. And what United States Air Force calls time compression actually exists as PTSD and other associated memory losses, having you miscalculate years on the calendars and dates that you know to yourself. I could say that happened to the whole planet 116 years ago. Common. Worldwide. The whole world saw the sky red for 2 weeks. About 10 years before that, the whole world heard a volcano erupt. The whole world heard it. The sound that was heard around the world. Krakatoa. 1800s Common Era, late 1800s, 1890s. Can't recall the exact year. I don't have a thing in front of me with my cue cards. I'm doing this freestyle from my memory. And these little words here that I wrote down this morning during the Democracy Now! But in 1908 Common Era, when my dad's father was about 2 to 3 years old, something smacked into this planet. And history tries to erase it. At least the cabal doesn't want it known. What happened 116 years ago, which had many Asian people in the regions of now Siberia and northern China, northern China, run for their lives, ending up the west coast of the Americas, and also people running west from the area where Tunguska happened, forcing people. Combat ended up happening because of language and everything else, and people not knowing cultures, and no one was flying back then worldwide like we are now, and not even taking boats around the world like we are right now. So 116 years ago, the whole world was thrown upside down into chaos, and that still is not in the historical record correctly yet. To compensate for what happened to American indigenous people, the total holocausting of our culture, which happened, was going on, in the process of happening when Tunguska happened. No one knows if Columbus came to the Americas 100 years before Tunguska, 200 years before Tunguska, or if it was 500 years before now. No one knew that 116 years ago. No one knew the exact date on the Anno Domini's calendar 116 years ago when the earth got smacked, after it got shaken up and everybody on the world heard it worldwide. The sound that was heard around the world, followed by a Miyagi event, which was like Aurora Borealis is being seen around the world, very far south. And then another event that the sky stayed red, like half the world was on fire for 2 weeks straight. The 2 weeks straight, sky staying red, that was Tunguska, 1908, June 30th, Common Era. Everything I've learned is correct, and what I witnessed is true, and what I feel to say is factual. It is highly likely that what they called World War II ended in 1972 Common Era, and people's calendar lengths weren't exactly 365 quarter days before 1972 worldwide for all cultures. And then by 1979 Common Era, when TV has infiltrated many of the G7 nations and other nations, and wealthy people have TVs, the world was still in a rapid change that started slowing down, and people, day counters, that were day counters before Tunguska, started counting the days. Even before I was told in 1979 to count the days and watch and count exactly 40 full years, which ended in 2019. 5 years later, it is 2024. And since it was September, my grandfather was telling this, it's a few months more. 45 years, September, October, November. 1979, Common Era. I'm 56. Some people tried to brainwash me, my mother, and other people that we were immortals. Some people older than me, possibly being younger than me. Some people younger than me, maybe being older than me. Some people I've met that I don't want to ever see again, maybe, because what I have to remember is a very gross thing that he might have did to me. There's a reason why my father would not like certain people that are in public media a lot, but like certain people a lot that are in public media, that the media always seems to slag or fag or put down or make it seem like they're always doing evil, even though they don't know what they're really doing, or even though they're not really telling you what they're really doing. Because I find it hard to think that all my life I didn't really know about Trump. I thought he didn't like people that look like me until after he was first elected. Then I found out about all these things he did for people that look like me. True, he has never apologized to the Central Park Five for what happened to them in the 90s or late 80s. I can't remember the exact year. There's a lot of information in my mind. But there was a time 5 boys were accused of sexually assaulting a woman and they didn't. And the actual criminal was found by DNA evidence. DNA evidence. Something that white supremacists seem to not want our people to think is real. Or something that members of the cabal seem to not want our people to realize is real. They make jokes of it to make uneducated people think that DNA science doesn't work or doesn't do what it does. I could say 100% for sure, Oprah Winfrey is not 100% Zulu. No, she's not. She was born in the Americas. She acted in a movie called The Color Purple and Roots. And before those movies came out, my mother used to identify as American Indian and know her Mayan and Mohawk roots. While my father, through homeschooling, has always tried to remind me we are American Indian. When they say Indian, classically, in language, in Latin, Indios, Indian, we're not Hindi, we're not Bharatian, we're not Indus, we're Indian, American Indian. And somewhere in the 70s, when I was a toddler, I could remember some super wealthy Bharatians, Sinhalese, Prasads. Maybe the Prasads are not the bad one because it seems that they were looking out for us. But Sinhalese and Bharatians decided to name Hindustan India to confuse American Indians while they're being labeled black in USA and being told they're African, but most of them are not. They're more American than people with American citizen most time. People that look like me and the other 2 in this building. Those 3 little birds. Ebony to ivory, copper complexion is what we'd like for the record in English. We had asked in 1984, why does the media always have to use black and white when they're talking about skin and people's culture, and use the word race when they know damn well race means competition, and it also means race, which means my ethnicity, and ism means enthusiasm, and ist means enthusiast. But they jump down and say racist, trying to mean you are being discriminatory because you said something. But that term racist and racism, psychologically every single day in everybody's mind that speaks English, because they know how English is thinking and they're raised speaking English, psychologically, even though they're not talking about it, it means enthusiasm for the competition. Enthusiasm for the culture or ethnicity or humanity. Racial discrimination definitely is discrimination every day, because you're saying racial, which means culture, ethnicity, not competition and discrimination. racist, and racism is showing love for humanity and the races. Racial discrimination, 100% all the time of the day, is discrimination. Whereas racism, racist, psychologically, is enthusiasm for the competition and enthusiasm for culture, ethnicity, or humanity. So how does it work out when you label someone a racist if they're discriminating against you and you want to make the point they're discriminating against you, but you're saying them racist psychologically? Competition and ethnicity and humanity is in their mind. They're enthused. Making people's blood pressure rise because you're calling them racist. You're racist. Oh, no, I'm not. No, what do you mean? They're not racist. They're not enthusiastic about the competition or their ethnicity or humanity or culture. And there goes a psychological battle in the head. Hence Michael Jackson in the song. Am I black or am I white? Black, white, black, white, black, white. It's bullshit. Psychologically, you listen to the song, he's in a mental freaking state. A bad mental state. Michael Jackson. Sir Paul McCartney. Ebony to Ivory. Living in harmony. Power to the people. Ivory power. Snow power. Coal power. Brown power. Coffee power. Is better to say. Coffee complexion. Copper colored complexion. Tones of brown. Tones of chocolate. I'd rather sit down and eat with people than debate if they're black or white. Because some people are using black for evil every single day, and they don't mean someone's skin. They mean black is an evil person, irregardless of skin. And some people are using black every single day for their skin, because that's how the U.S. has labeled some of us, American indigenous. So is it right? Psychologically, to us and our friends of many complexions, is it right? We get labeled black by USA. But some people automatically assume dark skin means evil, when that's incorrect and stupidity. If you think dark skin automatically means evil, you're the one with the psychological problem. If you assume pale skin or ivory skin or snow-colored skin means evil, you're the one with the psychological problem. A snow bunny, which has snow-colored fur in the winter, is well adapted to living in winter. But in the summer, its fur is brown. Could even be coal, gray, or other colors. Because it's a snow bunny. It's an Arctic bunny. When this climatic season changes from fall to winter and temperatures plummet, the skin starts changing and the fur starts changing to make a brown bunny. And that's what's brown in the summer, a snow bunny in the winter. Snow bunny does not mean person pale of skin or person ivory skin or white skin. If you're applying it to a person, I'm a snow bunny. Means I'm awesome in the winter. I could take winter. I could take the cold. I'm a winter soldier. I'm a winter boy. I'm a winter countryman. I got Inuit blood. I got Alouette blood. I got Inuktitut blood. I got Northern Cree blood. I got Icelandic blood. I got Norse blood. I got Peruvian blood. All cold places get snow heavy. But I also got Sioux blood, which is Plains Indian, and Mayan, which is tropical. So it's ignorance when people label people and determine their factor of evil or goodness based on their skin color. That is the highest stupidity of humanity. People, oh, because the person's skin is that color, they're automatically evil. Because a person's skin is this color, they're automatically good? That's the height of ignorance. And right now, United States, Trump's scary USA, it looks like Biff to a lot of people. Biff, the bad world that developed in Back to the Future, because people twisted the messages and tried to play with the future. They tried to gamble on the future. They tried to fix it to their own desire instead of taking fixing as repairing. Fix means repair, not make it so it works out our way. I told Obi-Wan Kenobi that Netanyahu was the Antichrist. I don't know if it was 1995, before my head was crushed and fractured, but it seems like it could have been, because the memory is that I'm sitting in Ottawa there, Tonin, and it's in an apartment building. So if I told Obi-Wan Kenobi in 1995 that Netanyahu's the Antichrist, and many people have asked me who the Antichrist is over time, they asked me different names. No. But I totally forgot that I told Obi-Wan, Old Ben Kenobi, by any other names. I told him in 1995 or 6, before 1999 for sure, Netanyahu's the Antichrist. No one else asked me about Netanyahu if he was the Antichrist. It just happened. We were sitting down watching news one day, and we were talking about Yitzhak Arab and Sharon Perez and the peace process. Because a lot of Palestinians are Semitic, but a lot of those Zionists are not. So what the hell is the United States doing following along with the Zionists? It's the world of Biff if Trump follows the Zionists, I tell you that for sure.